All right. So, like I said, we'll get started. This is a talk on balancing hormones naturally. If you follow me on Instagram or you get my emails, you've probably seen that I'm putting out a lot of information in the month of August, throughout this last month, on hormones, which is a big focus of what I do in practice, although I work with a lot of other things as well. But this month I wanted to really highlight hormones and put out information for you on the root causes for hormone imbalance, how you can address those through food, supplement, and lifestyle approaches. So we're going to go through kind of an overview today. I also, on my website at wiredandtiredwomen.com, have 4 different articles. If you'd rather watch them in video form, the same information is in IGTV videos on Instagram. So there's a few ways that you can get kind of more in-depth information on what we're going to go through today. But we're going to dive into how to apply all of this also if you're dealing with frustrating hormone symptoms. At the end of our time together today, I am going to share with you a special program that I have for the month of August. So stick around for that. It is discounted for the month of August. And so if it's something that you're interested in, I can share more with you at the end of class. In the meantime, we're going to have a lot of fun, and we're going to dive into hormonal chaos and why your hormones may be out of whack and how to balance them naturally. First off, I can share with you my background a little bit. I don't know everybody that's on this webinar. I recognize a handful of you, but there's a lot of new names to me. So my name is Brookes, and I want to tell you a story about how I got into functional medicine and nutrition and my experience with hormones. My health challenges started out really early. The first bite of food my mom gave me was a bite of plain yogurt, and it sent me to the hospital. So my first experience with food was slightly traumatic. I think I continued to have a poor relationship with food for a long time after that, because things I ate caused me a lot of issues for a while, and nobody ever knew why. So I grew up always breaking out in hives. I remember going to dance class and just regularly breaking out in hives and sitting on the side and just popping Benadryl until things subsided. Even in high school, a close friend of mine remembers me waking her up in the middle of the night to ask for the Benadryl. And so I always had all of these allergies. And that was really the only thing I knew about. I knew I couldn't eat dairy, but I didn't know about anything else. Fast forward into college, I entered into having an extremely poor relationship with food, had some disordered eating issues, and a lot of it stemmed from my stomach hurting a lot and not knowing what I could eat and kind of being afraid of how it would affect me. I also was having more anxiety, so that was one thing I could control. With feeling like I could be in control with was what went in my body and what didn't. Also, I started having more bloating and gas, and I had major sugar cravings. And that was a big piece of it too, around the disordered eating, was that when I would eat sugar, I felt like I didn't have any control about it. It was very addictive, and it felt like there was a monster in my body that just wanted to eat sugar. And so when I had it, I would want more of it. All in all, it was all very frustrating, and I think I dealt with it for a number of years because it wasn't impairing my day-to-day life. I was doing what I needed to do and going to work and school and all of that. But eventually it did start to creep into my career. And I used to be an actress. I was in New York and I was doing a lot of auditioning, and I was used to that, and it is stressful, but it became overwhelming when I would go into auditions that I felt like I couldn't breathe very well. And I would feel this like rapid heartbeat thing happening. And in my mind, I would look around and I knew that everything was fine, but it would happen anyway. And I felt like I couldn't breathe, which makes it pretty hard to sing in an audition. And that seems like something that might happen, walking into an audition, but I'd been doing this since the 5th grade and I'd never had that happen before. So I finally had one day where I had an audition, and it was for a casting director I really wanted to get in front of. And I went in and I totally bombed it. I just totally crashed and burned. And I got on the subway and I cried my way home, and decided I had to figure out what was going on. I was having too many digestive problems. I was having a lot of anxiety. And still I would break out in hives. I would eat and I'd get like a big welt on my face and things like that. So I went online and I looked around and I found a woman who called herself a functional nutritionist. And she talked about how the gut is related to our mood and to our hormones. And she talked about sugar addiction and yeast overgrowth. And it all just kind of resonated for me. So I made an appointment and I went in and I saw her, and she laid out, we did a couple lab tests. She laid out a plan for me based on the results. And I just couldn't believe that within, it was like 30 days to maybe 2 months, I had a significant reduction in anxiety. I felt so much calmer, and my body felt like it was in balance with what I was seeing around me, which was that, sure, life can be stressful, but I wasn't having any major stressors besides the typical things you deal with as a, somebody in their 20s and dating and working and things like that. And so I felt, I don't know, like 60% better. And then from there, the changes that she gave me just continued to improve. And over time, I was really able to get on top of some symptoms that had root causes that I just never knew about. And so that was my introduction to functional medicine. Eventually years later, I went back to school for nutrition, and then I went through a 2-year functional medicine training program. And now this is what I do. I'm also almost done with a master's in counseling psychology, because throughout my last 8 years working in nutrition, stress is such a big root cause too for people's issues. So I focus on that in practice as well. So that's just a little bit of my background. Now we are going to jump into 3 things that many women try to balance their hormones that often do not work. The first is hormonal birth control. The second is eating low carb. And the third is exercising more. Caveat to every single thing we talk about, that in some cases, like with birth control, you may be taking it for contraception, which is a pretty good purpose for birth control. That's why it was created. Eating keto may work if you have insulin resistance. If that's the root issue, then keto can be a really good approach. But just choosing it because hormones feel out of balance may cause more problems. It wouldn't be a good approach with amenorrhea and low cortisol and like adrenal fatigue type issues. But it could be a good support if somebody has insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes, maybe PCOS. So there's always, nutrition isn't black and white. And that's why root cause nutrition is so cool, is because we can learn more about what's happening and actually choose the right approach rather than just diving into whatever seems like the right approach. So I bring this up because keto and low carb are very popular approaches. They work well sometimes later. I can tell you that keto would have just sent me into the dirt. But once I worked on my root causes and I got myself onto a stress transformation daily practice, like doing yoga and meditating daily or almost daily and breath work, now low carb works really well for me. So sometimes nutrition approaches can work well at different points in our life. So, and that can evolve. And then the third one is exercising more, which we'll talk about. Whoop. So a little more we're going to go into each one a little more in depth. Hormonal birth control. Many people start the pill and it's not for birth control. It's prescribed quite often for frustrating hormonal symptoms. And some of those are acne, heavy periods, mood dysregulation, and other hormone imbalance symptoms. The pill, just to say some things about like the history of the pill, it's contributed to some really beneficial things for women. Social and economic improvements for women. It's allowed women to choose when or if they have a child and provide them the ability to work outside of the home. There was actually one study that found that the pill is partly responsible for a 30% increase in women's wages by the 1990s. It's also contributed to higher college enrollment and completion rate in the 60s and 70s. So I don't want to demonize the pill. It's done some great things for women. It gives us an option for choosing if or when one wants to have a child. But the pill has not kept up with the times. Women have complained of side effects for years, but there's been really very little improvement to the pill. Women prescribed the pill are more likely to be prescribed an antidepressant, and the pill is associated with an increased risk of heart attack, autoimmune disease, and thyroid and adrenal disorders. It is often prescribed, as I mentioned, for non-contraceptive reasons. And endometriosis is another reason another cause that it may be prescribed. I don't think I mentioned that one. Painful periods. And when this happens, a lot of women are not told about the possible ramifications of the pill. And it's not to point the finger at your doctor. Most doctors want you to feel better, and the pill can provide some symptom relief in the short term. The problem is that it doesn't get to the root cause of the issue. It just kind of puts a Band-Aid on it. It addresses the symptoms, but not the root cause of what's going on. So a little bit on how the pill works. There are different types of the pill, but typically it contains synthetic estrogen and progestin, and those inhibit the body's natural cyclic hormones. That can stop the body from ovulating, among some other changes, which in turn will prevent pregnancy. The reason that menstruation occurs when on the pill is due to the withdrawal of hormones for a week, and this causes a drop in hormones, and that causes the lining of the uterus to shed. So if you're on the pill, no judgment. I've taken different forms of synthetic hormones, birth control throughout the years, and personally, I never really felt quite right on them, so I kept switching, and eventually I did some more research and learned more about it and made a different choice for myself. And I'm not here to ever tell people what to do, but I'm just really passionate about education, so that if we are choosing to take something, we know the full picture and we can decide if it's the right fit or not. If you are currently on it and you started taking the pill to deal with hormonal issues, you can still look into your root causes and then discuss, how you want to proceed with your doctor or with a practitioner, depending on what your goals are. All right, eating keto or low carb. If blood sugar is an issue, like I mentioned, that could be helpful. But if the root cause is due to HPA axis dysregulation, that stands for hypothalamic pituitary adrenal dysfunction, which is otherwise often just referred to as adrenal fatigue. If you're really, really stressed all the time and cortisol is high, then jumping onto keto may be better after we address some stress. We implement some stress management techniques. Because when our blood sugar drops, cortisol increases a little bit, and blood sugar will be a little bit lower on a low carb approach. And if that increases cortisol a little bit and we haven't dealt with other root causes, it's possible that somebody could actually go on low carb and feel a little bit more anxious. Sometimes that happens in the short term and then they start to feel better. So there's some things to play with, but if you're looking for feeling better in the next month or so, you might want to go through a few other steps before trying low carb, or just get some labs and kind of identify what the best approach would be. If our blood sugar is dropping too low, then we want to manage that first, which may be more on a moderate carb diet to do that. Like if there's some hypoglycemia, then this also may not be a great approach, and that can negatively affect hormones as well. Exercising more. When we exercise, we are naturally inducing a stress response. Exercise is really important for our health, but just exercising harder and more is not typically going to help with hormones. If we are exercising to a degree and a length of time that is appropriate for our health, it is going to be more supportive of hormones. Cortisol, which is our stress hormone, it blocks the secretion of our main fertility hormone that is responsible for releasing our reproductive hormones. And so this is okay during periods of acute stress. If it's chronic, it can cause lasting effects. And we may end up with low libido and decreased fertility. If I lost you there, it just means that if we're under more stress and that's affecting our reproductive hormones, it's affecting our estrogen or progesterone or testosterone, doing long, hard workouts can just kind of like, it's like knocking punching someone while they're down. It's the phrase I'm looking for. It's too much. We need to do the types of exercise that are a little more rejuvenative. And we can do intense exercise, but we might want to shorten it. So if we're doing like 45 minutes or like a CrossFit class, we might want to shorten it to a 7-minute, 10-minute, 20-minute. Typically, we can figure out that this is going to help because we feel better on days that we do a shorter workout or we don't exercise, or better when we swim or do yoga. And that, I would say, was really hard for me because my body likes to be physical. And when I was really like in an adrenal fatigue state, I would feel good after I did a hard workout, but the next day I would feel fatigue. And I noticed when I did things like yoga, the next day that wouldn't happen. So that's called exercise intolerance. If you notice you have some of that going on, it can be hard to adjust that. I definitely empathize with that. But it is important to kind of adjust and figure out how you can tweak things to better support your energy and your hormones. All right, let's jump into the true root causes for hormone imbalance. So what is it that can really throw our hormones out of whack? The first one is undereating or eating the wrong balance of macronutrients. And this can cause blood sugar dysregulation. Like I said, I spent years trying to figure out what was wrong with me. Why did my friends have control around sugar? Why did I get so anxious when in my head everything seemed perfectly fine, yet my body was telling me otherwise? And why did I get constipated so easily? And if you've read the bio on my website, I was really constipated. And in my first pregnancy, I did a lot of really ridiculous things to try to go to the bathroom, like literally squatting on the toilet. And I'm glad nobody ever saw me, because if you saw a pregnant woman squatting on the toilet, it'd probably be quite the scene. And so it was bad. If our digestive health, we're going to talk about in a moment, but if that is out of whack, it can kind of wreak havoc on hormones. So that's a big root cause. At the time when I was trying to figure this out, I was exercising, I was eating well. Sometimes, obviously, I overdid sugar. And like I said, I had some disordered eating patterns, but by the time I actually went to that functional nutritionist, I really was eating pretty healthy foods. I just would have bouts where I'd get into the sugar. But then I'd go for, a couple of weeks or whatever, and I'd just be kind of eating what I thought were the right balance of foods for me. But there were other root causes that were fueling the issues. And one of them was blood sugar dysregulation. And it was in part due to my gut health. I had some issues going on in my gut, and that was dysregulating my blood sugar. But I have also through the years learned that I am a sugar addict. And just like an alcoholic, you don't give an alcohol a drink and figure that they'll be fine. And I am someone who just does better and feels very level and balanced and very in control around food when I just avoid sugar. So that's been a journey to learn where I need to be with that, but I stick to a mostly non-sugar, low-carb approach, which works well for me. That's not the approach for everybody, but if you have that sort of addictive, that sugar addictive nature, which we have research on, and it is a real thing. Some people have lower levels of dopamine receptors in the brain. And so we need to get more of the things to get that dopamine response and that rise in that neurotransmitter. We need more of that food. And so when we have it, it can cause this more addictive nature. And sugar lights up the brain the same way that cocaine does and heroin. It is not as to the same degree, but it is the same response in the brain from sugar. And so just something I like to throw out there. I will continue in the future to talk more and more about sugar addiction. So I will get you more information on that as well. But if that's going on and the wrong amount of carbs are being eaten in ratio to protein and fats for your individual issues or, root causes, then that can dysregulate hormones. Stress is a big one, friends. It's probably no surprise to any of you, but if we are dealing with high levels of stress, that is going to raise our cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And our hormones are all in communication. I always like think of it as like if you, I don't know, I'm trying to think like of the strings of a guitar. If you pluck them, now this is a bad metaphor, forget that one. But one is going to affect the other, right? So if you've got here's a better one. If you've got a bunch of things floating in a small pond and you throw something in, there are going to be waves that affect everything else floating in that pond. And that is the way that our hormones work. And there's feedback loops on all of them. And so if we're dealing with a lot of stress, we even have the same building blocks for cortisol as we do for estrogen, as we do for progesterone and testosterone. So they're all steroid hormones. We need cholesterol as a building block for all of them. There's other things that are needed to make those hormones. And if we're kind of using up those building blocks for cortisol because it's always high, it can affect our other hormones. And so this is the part where I have to say that there's almost no way to fully get hormones in balance unless we also focus on stress transformation techniques. And in many cases, the more and more I work with people, the more this is kind of becoming a foundation of what we work on. Some people that I see as clients don't need as much work there, or they're already doing some of that. Other people need more help with that. So I do something called SomaticExperiencing, and I do that in nutrition coaching sessions. And it is basically an approach that helps regulate the nervous system. Because if we can feel like our system, our nervous system and our organism is relaxed, then we're not getting that like cascade of hormonal issues that happens when we're constantly like our cortisol's shooting up and we're staying high on a day-to-day basis. The other piece is that if our cortisol is high day after day, month after month, year after year, it eventually, our body will try to fix that issue. And we have cortisol receptors on the pituitary gland, and they will try to fix it by downregulating. This is what happens with insulin resistance. We can also get cortisol resistance. And so ultimately, the takeaway with that is that over time, people start feeling more tired. Their body's not really registering the cortisol, right? They're not getting the response of having their cortisol being produced from the adrenal glands. The receptors aren't responding appropriately. And so they're not feeling that benefit of feeling alert and focused. And cortisol helps us learn. It makes us feel motivated. It helps us be creative. And so over time, we can feel fatigued, kind of less creative, less excited about the things we're doing. And that's what happens with adrenal fatigue, essentially. And this is something we're going to talk about testing. It's something that is looked for on the test I do, and we can address that. But to address that, we also have to do some of the day-to-day stress management techniques. But it's very rewarding, and I find it's the hardest thing for people to start to do, but once they do it, they can't stop. They love it. Another root cause is microbiome and digestive issues. And that's a big one. If somebody comes in and they're going to do like 2 tests to address hormones, I would do a stool test and a hormone panel, because we actually can see things between the 2 of those that may show us how one is affecting the other. So, for example, if there is leaky gut present, that can cause something called lipopolysaccharide, LPS, which produces inflammation, and that can dysregulate hormones. We can see dysbiosis, which is an imbalance in the bacteria, and that can cause leaky gut, which causes those other issues. There's also something called the estrogen, and the estrogen refers to specific bacteria that's in our gut that is responsible for regulating estrogen in the body. And so if I've seen that on tests where we see that something called beta-glucuronidase is high on the stool test, and then they're estrogen dominant when we see it on the hormone panel. And that's always really interesting because it tells us that it's these issues in the gut that are affecting hormones. There are also bacteria in the gut that can produce estrogen-like compounds from the foods we eat. So if we have dysbiosis, that's that imbalanced bacteria in the gut, it can affect the production and breakdown of estrogen in the digestive system. So all very interconnected, and those are just a few of the mechanisms of many that can affect things. Ultimately, we want to get the microbiome and digestive health operating really well. So if you have gut symptoms, if you have bloating and gas and reflux or abdominal pain or anything like that, that can be the root of what's going on with hormone symptoms that you're noticing. It is also possible that your digestive health feels fine. You don't notice anything, but I've still had things show up that are causing people's hormone issues just because their microbiome isn't really diverse, or there's kind of overgrowths of certain things. And luckily it's not giving them irritating digestive symptoms, but it is impacting some other systems in their body. Toxic burden is basically, we're taking in toxins all the time. Our world is more toxic than it ever was. I actually was just on a training on hormones through the Institute for Functional Medicine. And they were talking about how at the turn of the century, the average age for women to have their period, to get their period for the first time, was 17. And now it's considered for it to be normal to happen from age 9 to 14. And based on evidence and research, the reason they think this is happening and that it's going down in age is due to the xenoestrogens that we have in chemicals and plastics and things in our environment that are shifting, that are causing higher estrogen levels in the onset of the menstrual cycle. So just share that because I thought that was really interesting. And, it really can't be denied that we have so much research showing, these chemicals in cord blood of fetuses, and even in practice when we test, people usually show up with high levels of certain things. And so if we have high toxic burden, that can overburden the liver, and it detracts from breaking down excess hormones. This can lead to higher levels of hormones and a disruption in hormone balance. So in practice, I don't always start with that. I typically start with addressing gut health, because even if we need to detox, we can't properly detox unless our digestive system is working well. And we don't even want to, because we don't want to release toxins in the blood and not be able to eliminate them through stool. And so that's important to get digestive health in order. And then we can always do a detox, or we can do some testing and check in and see if we need to do some deeper level detox. But that's a big root cause. Also, I talked about gut pathogens and overgrowth, and then aging is obviously going to cause a shift in hormones. Progesterone decreases faster than estrogen as women age, and that can lead to estrogen dominance. I know this is focused on women, but as men age, testosterone levels decline, but estrogen declines at a slower pace, and that can lead to an imbalance of testosterone and estrogen. So we always keep that in mind. And if stress is high and we're aging, that can really cause some crappy menopause symptoms because progesterone is very affected by stress too. And so, if that's already declining faster, plus we're really stressed and that's affecting it, then we may want to do some things to support progesterone in the body. All right. I mentioned pretty well, I think, the hormone and gut connection. Another piece is that SIBO, which stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that can really wreak havoc with hormones and with cortisol. And it can be silent, meaning we can have that without having any digestive symptoms. However, most people with SIBO will have bloating, gas. They might have some constipation or some diarrhea. It can go either way, depends on what gas is being produced from the bacteria. And it can also affect our nutrient absorption. It can affect fat absorption, and we need healthy fats for hormone production. And so if we're not digesting, breaking down, and absorbing our fat, that can have a negative effect on hormones. So another thing too is that I mentioned that if we have bacterial infections in the gut, then that LPS, that inflammatory endotoxin from the gut, can translocate into our circulation, and it can interfere with progesterone production. So I mentioned that that can also cause a short luteal phase. So that's the second half of the cycle. And what you may notice is that your overall cycle is short. And so I have a lot of clients who have that. And, you know, this can cause infertility. And it's also frustrating when you are getting your period every 2.5 weeks. It feels like you're nonstop on your period. So that is something that we can work on as far as working on, you know, we can get that lab test. We can also, if progesterone is low, there are many things that we can do to help adjust that. Let's see here. Okay. I wanted to give you an example. I always learn well from like cases or just examples of people and what we did and what that looks like. And especially if it's something that you're kind of interested in and thinking about doing for yourself. This is a client of mine, Jessica, who we will go through, and I'll just kind of share with you what her process was. So her initial complaints and frustrations were that she was fatigued. She had a lot of anxiety. She was constipated. She also had insomnia. She was really tired all day, and couldn't sleep at night. Like she would wake up and then she'd kind of be awake in the middle of the night. And that's really frustrating for her because she is a mom of 4 kids. The youngest when she came to see me was age 4. She reported that she would eat on the run, that she's always busy. She said she wanted to have more energy and she wanted to have a bowel movement daily to sleep well. And that she was really just too busy to be dealing with all these symptoms. It was not serving her. She had too much going on. So the tests that we ordered, and I'm going to tell you more about this first one, but the tests were the Dutch Hormone Panel, which is the one that I use, and it is a really amazing test to get a really good picture of what's going on with hormones. A SIBO breath test we did because she had so many symptoms of that, and a comprehensive stool analysis. And then we also got some markers to look at her thyroid, iron, and blood sugar. These are the results from the breath test. And just so you know, I changed her name to protect her privacy, but this is what came up on the test, is that she had, you can see this like green is methane dominant bacteria. It's really high. So she had methane dominant bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine. And what happens when that's going on is I had this too. And so I very much understand what this feels like with the bloating that can happen. And sometimes people don't even realize, like I didn't realize how bloated I was until I wasn't bloated. And it was partly what led me to feeling like I didn't know when I was full or not, because full always felt really tight, right? I was bloated. So I was always like, didn't get that hunger, like that full signal properly. Once I wasn't, I just had to eat like a plate of food that looked about right. And over time, I got used to the feeling of fullness that wasn't the bloated feeling. So that can also affect like appetite, is my point there. So with this, we need to deal with that bacteria. But that was there. In her case, it was causing a lot of constipation. What's really cool about this is that when we address it, usually people notice pretty quickly that their bowel movements start to normalize. It can take a little work to get it to like completely resolve, but they do start to get better pretty quick. Then on her stool analysis, which I don't have those results up here to show you, but she had imbalanced bacteria. She had a lot of overgrowths of opportunistic bacteria. She had some pathogenic bacteria that was a little high. Her good stuff was low. She also had some yeast overgrowth, and there was some significant fat malabsorption, which is probably due to what we're seeing here with the SIBO. That's common with SIBO. Then we got a hormone panel, and this is you get a lot of information when you do the Dutch test, but this is, at least a couple pages of what we saw on hers. And so this isn't too bad, actually. Her estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone were imbalanced. We have more problems when those are out of balance. That's why we call it hormone imbalance, right? We can have everything be low, but if it's imbalanced together, we tend to be doing better than when it's like totally off. If it was all really high, we'd still be doing better than if it was all really off. And it is in the normal range. So that was actually pretty good. Down here where we see the saliva-free cortisol pattern, we can see that in the morning. And part of this was that she got woken up by a kid, and she said that's kind of stressful when it's like suddenly out of sleep. So we can see that happening there at the beginning. It's kind of high. But then it's like kind of to the low end. We never got a raise. See that? It probably just went up because right before she did the first sample of the day, she got woken up suddenly. But then it never, what is good to see is something called the cortisol awakening response, which means that if we wake up and it's kind of low, okay, we will work on that. But if we then see it go up within 30 to 60 minutes, that's a good thing. We want that. If that doesn't happen, it's showing that we're not really like responding well in that hormone to our energy needs through the day, to our activity, right? We're not getting the response we need. So that didn't happen. And then it's just kind of in the low. It's not horribly low, but it is in the low range and drops below normal by the end of the day. So she's just kind of like stuttering along is what that shows us. So some adrenal fatigue basically going on, some HPA axis issues. Then she has low metabolized cortisol, which tells us a lot about, it makes us wonder how her thyroid is functioning and how her liver is functioning. So because the total cortisol production explains to us that her adrenals are making cortisol. They're doing what they need to do, but she's not metabolizing it, and that can affect also what we're feeling in our energy. We want it to be metabolized at a good level as well. And so I wondered about her liver function, and we'll get to that in a moment. Also on this test, it showed that her glutathione was low, which also goes along with liver function because that is the primary antioxidant in the body. It's very necessary for liver pathways to work properly. She had low melatonin at night. She had her dopamine and serotonin looked pretty good, which makes sense because she didn't have huge mood issues. It was more energy that she was talking about. Then when we look at this page, we see that this test tells us how estrogen is breaking down, and it can tell us if it's that more potent estrogen that's more associated with cancer risk versus a more protective estrogen. So we can see that. And again, this is something that we can tweak if it's off. DHEAS is low. DHEA is a precursor. It's a hormone that is a precursor to all of the other hormones as well. So if that's ultimately low and other things are low, we can supplement DHEA. I don't usually supplement it right off the bat, especially if we haven't done detox yet, but it is an option, especially if somebody's feeling really bad. And it can be a really good long-term solution. We just don't want to do it if somebody has liver issues, and we don't want to do high amounts if we think there may be a problem there. But otherwise, for a hormone, it's a very safe hormone overall, but it is still a hormone. So I tend to do other things first, and then if we need it, we add that in. Couple other comments here. Whoops. Yeah, I think that's enough on that. So there's a few other things we did, limiting alcohol, kind of, we didn't take it out completely, but kind of limited having a glass of wine to the weekend, and did a little bit of high intensity interval training at a shorter amounts of time, right? So, and by shorter, I mean, it was 7 to 10 minutes, and that she tolerated well. And eventually she was able to increase that once she was doing better with her hormones and her energy. So she did a 6-week digestive protocol for the SIBO yeast, fat digestion, and microbiome balance. And then we did an appropriate diet for slightly low hormones and low DHEA. So that was a moderate carb approach. Her blood sugar looked decent. So we figured, let's base it off of the hormones and make sure that we're not like pushing your system too hard by doing a super low carb. But we definitely cut back some of the sugar and carbs and got it more in a moderate range, which can feel low for people depending on where they start from. We included a lot of broccoli, sprouts, and greens, and veggies, and liver supportive food. We also used Vitex, which is an herb that I talk about in my latest article. It's really great for cycle regulation, for progesterone production, and it's good when you don't really know what else is going on. So if you're just watching this and you walk away with one idea, Vitex can be a nice like harmonizer. Bladderwhack is an herb that can also be great for thyroid function, for immune function. Her thyroid looked okay, but there was a little bit of, there were some markers that were a tiny bit off there. So we included that. Zinc, the glutathione to get that level back up. We did catecholacalm. That's another one that if you're dealing with a lot of stress, I have a lot of success with clients taking that. It has B vitamins in it, and it also has some herbs and nutrients that can help manage cortisol throughout the day. So that can be really helpful. It did help her sleep better. We did some mindfulness and breath work and mindful eating approaches on a daily basis. And like I said, kind of adjusted her exercise. She reported that her symptoms were 50% resolved within 3 weeks, which is really good. Sometimes it takes longer. But because of the SIBO, what I see is that when we really jump in and do everything for that, we usually see some pretty quick improvement. Sometimes once we're off of it, things creep back and we have to do a second round. And that's pretty normal with SIBO. It just depends. But in her case, she stayed going pretty well. We kept like one extra supplement or two in for a few months until she was able to let that one go. She said after 2 months, she felt 70% better. And then after that, she did do a detox. We focused on some liver and detox support. And after 6 months, she said she felt 85% back to her old self. And that is also with the caveat of implementing some daily practices. Like she adjusted her lifestyle somewhat, but not so huge. But I always say that to say that, you know, I always tell people when we work on things, I can help guide and give all the information and all of that and kind of be like a cheerleader too with including these things on a daily basis. I'm doing all of that myself. Like I'm always adjusting what I do week to, you know, month to month. And when I fall a little bit off, which we all do, kind of working to get back on. So it's a lifelong practice. And so I just say that I should add that into this slide, that she was 85% back after doing everything, after getting to her root causes, after doing the protocols, and then also carrying through some dietary and lifestyle adjustments that helped her stay on track. So let's talk about hormone testing. You can get, when you go to a regular checkup, you can get some blood, like a blood test for hormones, and blood tests are extremely accurate. So they are great to do, but it's one moment in time. So it doesn't give us quite the information we can get on some other testing, but it is a useful thing if that's all that's available. That's something that can be taken into account. Then there's saliva testing and there's urine testing. And for a while, a lot of integrative physicians were doing saliva testing because that was what was available at first. We can still do that. It does give us a better picture of over time, but it's not as effective as blood. Urine is a little more effective than saliva, quite a bit more effective, but also there have been now some tests using dried urine that will look at your hormones throughout a 24-hour cycle and also throughout the entire month. So I tend to do the 24-hour more often, and we do it during the luteal phase, after ovulation, and that gives us the best look at what's going on. We also, if somebody is having some major fluctuations throughout the cycle, we can also do a cycle mapping test, and that will give us day to day of what's happening. So that option is out there. It's become the gold standard in functional medicine. It's a really great test. And so that's kind of all on that. If you want to read more about it, you can go to dutchtest.com. But I just want you to know that's available out there if you're trying to get some hormone testing and get like a really good look at what's happening. And that was that test I was showing you with the example. All right, I promised I would share some tips for hormone balance. So the first one, when we're talking about food, is to include omega-3 fats from wild-caught fish. You can use flaxseed, hemp seed, walnuts. There's other plant-based sources of omega-3. It's also good to make sure we're getting DHA and EPA, which come from animal foods primarily, such as wild-caught fish. And if you're not including that, you can supplement. You know, here I live we're landlocked, and so we don't have a lot of good fresh seafood, wild-caught seafood. And so, you know, a lot of clients that I have locally will include maybe some of that and also an omega-3 supplement. But that is something we want to make sure that we are including. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about seed cycling, which also we can adjust the fatty acids that we're eating throughout the month. We can eat half a plate of non-starchy veggies at each meal and plenty of leafy greens. And part of this is that there are a lot of nutrients in the rainbow of vegetables that we need for our detoxification pathways to be working well. And hopefully you've learned on this that those are vital for breaking down and eliminating or recycling what we need for hormones. And so if those processes aren't working well, it could be due to micronutrient deficiencies. And one of the best ways that we get all of our micronutrients is through the rainbow of vegetables in our foods. And I always acknowledge to people that eating vegetables is sometimes the hardest because they're not as palatable. They don't fill us up as fast when we're really hungry, and they take longer to make. So I acknowledge that, and that can be difficult. But there are a lot of strategies that we can do to help get veggies in, from having like bags of pre-cut broccoli with some dips that we keep, you know, even mini containers that we can take on the run, to making like some massive amounts of roasted vegetables, which can improve the flavor, especially if you add some olive oil. So some things like that to like really keep those in at each meal is helpful. Seed cycling has been around for decades, for a very long time. And it is I'll first say what you do, and then I can tell you why it's beneficial. Basically, during the follicular phase, which is days 1 to 14 of a 28-day cycle, it's basically up until ovulation, you eat 1 to 2 tablespoons each of raw, fresh ground flax seeds and pumpkin seeds. And that can help with estrogen production and metabolism. Then in the ovulation luteal phase, from days 15 to 28 of a 28-day cycle, we will eat 1 to 2 tablespoons of raw, fresh ground sunflower and sesame seeds. And those seeds support progesterone production. What I've done to do this is that if you like nut butter, like I like dipping carrots in nut butter or things like that, or even just having a scoop of it for a snack if I'm in a hurry, I will take pumpkin seeds or buy a pumpkin seed butter, or you can just make it and put flaxseed in it. And then I can just use that as like a nut butter, or have just a spoon of it, and that'll work. 1 to 2 tablespoons. You can just have a couple spoons, you know, a couple tablespoons of it. And then during the second half of the cycle, you can eat 1 to 2 tablespoons of raw ground sunflower and sesame. And so I like sun butter, so I just take sesame seeds and put it in there, and then do that. So that's one way to make it easy. If you do like a smoothie, you could just throw it in your smoothie. If you do some other type of food that you could add that to, you can do that. But seed cycling is, it's been around for a very long time, as I mentioned. It supports cardiovascular health. As we learn more about the microbiome, we are learning more about how different foods can enable the critters to grow in our gut and thrive and support our health. And so for one, it helps support fiber in the diet, and the different types of seeds can support the elimination of excess hormones like estrogen via the bowels. They are also, when we look at the follicular phase, estrogen is our main hormone that rises and spikes to trigger ovulation. And so pumpkin seeds are included then because they're rich in zinc, and that can support healthy testosterone levels, which rises prior to ovulation. And those are just a couple things on that. And in the luteal phase, there are lignans and fatty acids that can support progesterone production, which we want to be optimal at that point. Sesame seeds have also been studied to lower inflammation. And many times we get more inflammation around, if you're dealing with PMS, there can be some inflammatory things going on, and so that can help with that. So that's just something that has been around a long time and is supported by science that you can try and see if that helps with cycle regulation and with hormones throughout the month, assuming that you're premenopausal. Limiting refined sugars and flours is a big deal. And that is, of course, a process sometimes, and that's fine, but beginning to find some ways to adjust that is helpful for hormones. I just put out, as I mentioned, an article on supplements for hormone balance, so I go into a whole lot more, but a few kind of takeaway ideas for today is that maca is really like a superfood that you can use that can help with libido and energy and hormone balance. I mentioned Vitex. And then another favorite of mine is rhodiola, which is great if you're dealing with stress and hormone imbalance. That can be a good one. Of course, daily mindfulness, breath work, and mindful eating. You can do all kinds of things to help with mindset, like daily gratitude practices, meditation, affirmations, things like that. And then making sure movement, we're doing it, but we're not doing too much. Not doing too little and not doing too much. Periodic detoxification is great for hormone balance too. And I usually host a detox in January and then in May as a group program. So you can always do that periodically if you would like to jump on board for that. I always send out some handful of emails before those times when we do that. So we're getting towards the end of our time together. And if you have questions, do put them in the chat box. I'll check that in just a moment. I want to share with you an August special if you're interested in getting on top of frustrating hormone symptoms. It's called the Hormonal Health Package. And basically it is doing the Dutch Hormone Panel. It includes that if you're wanting to get testing done and actually take a look at your reproductive hormones, dopamine, melatonin, DHEA, cortisol, your 24-hour cortisol pattern. So you would get that panel. And then typically the way I work is that before I do any labs, I do a new client case review where we meet, and so I can make sure we're actually ordering the right labs for you. And I do that first, then we get labs, and then we do a lab review. So for this program, if you're knowing that what you want is the hormone panel, and we can email back and forth a little bit, I'm kind of cutting out that first step and combining it all into one and giving you all of it for a reduced price. And so this package includes the hormone panel. It includes a new client case review plus the lab review together, and with some extra time to make sure we do all of that. And then you will also get an individualized nutrition supplement and lifestyle plan, which I will detail out for you after that appointment and after we get your labs back, so that you have a plan to take and use going forward. And then you can also follow up with me on questions. And if you're needing more help later, we can always do some follow-up appointments, but this is what's included in the package. You can read more about it and book at this website, bit.ly/hormone package. You can also feel free to email me if you have questions about it. And it is currently, usually doing all of this is $800. That panel is $350. And for August, I'm giving it to you for $600. So if that is something that would support you, let me know. I can answer your questions on it and get you going. So that's my last slide. It's been a pleasure. I love talking about functional medicine and nutrition and hormones, and it is my passion because of my own experience to share that with you and give you the tools so you can take control of your own health and make choices that best support you. I try to put up a lot of information on my website at wiredandtiredwomen.com. I also have a rescue guide there. If you're just getting started, there's some really good starting tips on things you can do to help your energy and help your sleep in that guide. So feel free to go there and download that guide. And there are many blogs there as well. I always kind of constantly trying to write and get some articles up for you or videos with educational content. And then Instagram.com/BrookesSeesTheDay is I regularly post there and put up IGTV movies and things like that. So I just want to share all that with you in case it can support you as you address your health. And now we're going to take some questions. I see, Nicole, what you wrote. You're so welcome. I'm glad that that you found this helpful. And so I see your comment there. I'm going to read these chats here. Okay. Sounds like Nikki, that's awesome. You need a list of supplements. I will get that to you. And also for all of you, I'm going to type in the chat box this here. Let me see if I actually, if you go to wiredandtiredwomen.com, it'll be the first article that comes up, has a whole list. And I will actually stop this screen share and really quickly show that to you because I think you'll like what's here. I just got this up this week and I think it'll really add on to what we talked about today for you. So let me show you here. It is screen share. This article, Balance Hormones Naturally Part 4. And so it's got some initial info, but then I go through core supplements first, magnesium, vitamin D, B complex, probiotics and prebiotics. And then I go into herbs and mushrooms. Know that that first section, you could take all of those together and then add on some options from the herbs and mushrooms. You don't need to take all of the herbs and mushrooms, but you can read through and see which would be the most helpful. And I know at least one or two of you on here have already decided to do this package and you were here getting some more info. So if you are doing it, you can read this, but I will be helping you. I'll be detailing that out for you in your own individualized plan. But for those of you who maybe aren't going to do the package and you're just trying to get some info, definitely check out this article because it'll give you some more on the specific herbs and options there. I'm just looking at the last couple questions before we wrap up. Yes, a question on postmenopause. You can do the hormone panel postmenopause. The only time I typically will avoid doing it is when we're in the middle of perimenopause and cycles are kind of all over the place, because we could do it one day and it could look really different the next day. So during that time, I will work more on the food, lifestyle, and some of the other root causes like gut health that could be, giving someone some more difficult perimenopausal symptoms. But if you're postmenopausal, it's a test that can be very helpful as well to assess hormone levels. I think I answered everything. I see the question about Vitex and that email. So yeah, I will follow up. And the Vitex email is actually, it's on my website. So this, I will get to you. All right, I don't want to keep you all here. I think I hit everything, it looks like. So yes, Kathy, if you go to my website, that first one that I was just showing you, this one here, this part 4 will have info on Vitex. So I think that'll help you out. All right, it's been a pleasure. I hope that you all have a lovely day. Please reach out to me if you ever have questions. If you have questions about that package as well, let me know. And otherwise, yay for improving hormones. And I will let you know when the next webinar is ready. All right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.